Breaking the gray.
Sarah,
Russ,
I see you, and you are still here in the United States. I still feel the energy of you around, but you're further away. But you're on the East Coast this week, correct?
yes, and I've just been to the fabulous Biohacking Congress. So yes, I'm here in Miami for the tail end of that. So yes, very happy.
And you saw all of your good friends, and not my friends yet. At some point, they'll be my friends.
I'm sure they're your friends, Russ. My friends are your friends. You know that.
Oh, thank you. That's so great. Well, I am so happy today because I think many people have seen that we've been promoting the Epigen product and Cardio Diagnostics, and we have Meesha Dogan on today. So, Meesha, it's so great to have you on our podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, Meesha, we as a full body podcast around biohacking. Many people focus on just one certain area. We've talked about everything from sleep and eating and diet. All those things are so important in red light. And let's talk about heart health a little bit and sort of how you started. How did you get into heart health, and why is the heart such an important thing for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can't say I started off knowing that I was going to take this journey or be in the heart health field. I knew growing up that I wanted to do research. I had an uncle who was working at Nestle at that time, who did his PhD in Australia under food science biochemistry. And whenever he used to visit, I grew up in Malaysia, and whenever he used to visit, he used to tell us about all the fascinating research he was doing at Nestle in food science. He used to talk about his patents and studies and experiments. And so growing up, I knew that I wanted to explore research. I wanted to do science. I wanted to be as cool as my uncle. And so when I moved to Iowa to do my bachelor's in chemical engineering at the University of Iowa, I thought, what a great opportunity for me to get into the research side of things as a work-study undergrad student. And that's exactly, I'm fortunate that I got in a lab that was studying a field called epigenetics. Now I'm dating myself, but that was about nearly 15 years ago when epigenetics wasn't really, very well known. It's still, an up and coming field. It's still an area a lot of providers and researchers are getting used to. But at that time, we still didn't know too much about it. We didn't have ways to measure epigenetics at scale. But it was a fascinating world. It was the first time I heard about it. And it's the first time I ever heard about, our ability to use our lifestyle and environment and make an impact in a lot of different areas of our health as well as heart health. So when I went on to do my PhD in biomedical engineering at the University of Iowa, there was another field that was up and coming in healthcare, and that was machine learning and artificial intelligence. We were starting to collect a lot of clinical medical research data in healthcare that we needed to make some sense of and figure out what are we seeing. And that's when I was able to put the world of epigenetics that at that point that I've studied and published on for years with the world of machine learning and artificial intelligence as an engineer. The reason heart health was sort of at the forefront or of interest when I was doing my PhD is because I do come from a family with 2 generations of heart disease, specifically heart attacks. And it's one of those things we all have seen, heard of directly, indirectly, but it was an opportunity to see if we could use this emergent science of epigenetics and technologies like machine learning and AI to just make sense of it all. And so that's really how the heart health studies and me being involved in that area came about. Like I said, I didn't plan it to the T. But it was an opportunity to make an impact, given that heart disease is the #1 killer. It's the ability for us to get ahead of the problem and use science and technology to be able to do that.
Yeah, and and Meesha, you're co-founder of Cardio Diagnostics, you're CEO. So doing both, I mean, both of those are not easy tasks to do because you're also having to be an inventor and you're coming up with an idea for a product and having to put that product together. And your product is, we've been promoting it like crazy on our show. It's the Epigen CHD. It's a home test to actually help you diagnose coronary heart disease. And I'm curious too, because I've always heard that coronary heart disease is sort of that silent killer, right? Like you don't really know you have it, you feel healthy, but then sometimes it's almost too late, right? When you're at the doctor and they're like, "I'm sorry, but you have it." So how does the product and the kit work? How does it all come together so we can get ahead of this?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're a company that's building solutions, as you pointed out, to get ahead of the problem. And the best way to get ahead of the problem is to think about prevention. Now, I like to say that all of us are at risk for heart disease, right? But the question is to what extent? And the next question is if we are at elevated risk, we have the opportunity to make a change in a way where we can reduce the risk. So it's not set in stone that, if we have risk factors or maybe not great lifestyle or even some family history of it, we're not essentially doomed. We have the ability to change it. And the other thing about prevention is how many of us think of our doctors when we don't have aches or pains or, when we're perfectly well? Not many of us do. And when we built our solutions, and specifically this EpiPlusGen CHD test, one of the things that was top of mind for us is how do we get this in the hands of as many people as possible? It's the best, most advanced technology out there. It is a clinical test, so you have the guidance and involvement of a healthcare provider. But at the same time, how do we meet you where you are and get this test in your hands so you don't have to think too much about taking the steps to prevent heart disease? We're there to help facilitate that. And so for us, one of the options was, can we build the test or the delivery of the test in a way where it can be 100% remote? And that's essentially what we did. Now, when you think about the traditional preventive test, you have to go into your doctor's office, you have to make an appointment. We wanted to remove all of those barriers so everyone can participate in prevention. And essentially, as Russ, you pointed out, it is an at-home test. So there is a version, I should say, that's at-home based. Essentially, what it is once the provider orders the test for you, in this case, we've coupled to telemedicine providers. So you go on your computer, fill out all the necessary forms, give your health history questionnaire. The physician reviews whether or not you're eligible for the test and orders the test for you. And once they order the test for you, we essentially send our at-home sampling kit, where it's a Lancet-based kit. A lot of people who screen for diabetes on a day-to-day basis, they prick their finger. Same method, but instead of just pricking your finger and checking for blood glucose, you're putting 8 to 10 drops of blood in a small tube and you're dropping it in the mail. FedEx takes it to the lab and it gets assessed for your biomarkers. So essentially, you're able to go through the entire process without leaving your home unless you need to drop the sample, of course, and the results get shared back with the provider who ordered the test for you. But if someone says, you know what, I just want to go in, Lancet is not my thing, I see my clinician, I'm happy to, go in and get it done, they just draw a venous draw. So just right here, the usual blood draw, 2 ml tube in the mail, the entire process is the same.
Perfect. And I'm wondering, what kind of markers are you looking for? Because, the heart disease, that's quite a broad category. What kind of things are you able to detect with that? What seems like a very simple test. You're just giving like one little vial of blood.
So the test specifically looks at 3-year risk for coronary heart disease. So if we're thinking about coronary heart disease, buildup of plaques in our artery, the narrowing of our arteries, that essentially reduces blood flow to our heart. And it's the primary cause of heart attacks because when there's lack of flow of blood to our heart, our heart tissue essentially dies, which is a heart attack. And what we're trying to do is we're looking at an individual's 3-year risk for coronary heart disease, meaning if I took the test today, what's the likelihood I may have a coronary heart disease event in the next 3 years? So that removes as much of the blind spots from providers and patients in being able to provide more effective care. What are we measuring? We're measuring essentially 2 types of DNA biomarkers. The first is epigenetics. We talked about epigenetics briefly. And essentially what epigenetics is, it's think about our lifestyle and environment at a molecular level. Everything I do, everything I'm exposed to, it translates into my cells reacting, changing, adopting as a way to respond to my lifestyle and environment. So one simple example is if I'm a smoker, I'm introducing my cells to a lot of toxins. My cells, as opposed to a non-smoker, would have to behave differently in removing those toxins. So these DNA methylation epigenetic markers, they change in a way where they're making the necessary proteins to be able to remove those toxins. Another way to think about it is our DNA software, right? It's our lifestyle and environment influencing our DNA software so it can respond to who we are and what we're doing. So that's essentially the first type of DNA biomarker that we're measuring. And before I move on to the second type, I think it's worthwhile pointing out that the measurement of epigenetic markers, the incorporation of it in our test is extremely powerful because about 80% of our risk for heart disease is non-genetic. So another way to phrase it would be only about 20% of our risk for heart disease is genetics.
I was just going to ask it. You took the words right out. I was just going to ask, what do you think? Because I think people do think that, their genetics plays a major role in their health. And lifestyle, I think people say, yeah, okay, I have a few lifestyle things, maybe people eat too much of the wrong food, smoking, not the right light environment. I was going to ask you about the relative risks. How much do you think that pans out, these kind of epigenetic lifestyle changes, which is really, if you put it in another language, it's just people's actual lifestyle choices over the genes that they were kind of dealt at birth. So please, I'd like you to go over, what are those relative risks? Because I think maybe people underestimate, how much lifestyle actually does impact their health.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there are studies published over and over again that show that only about 20% of our risk for heart disease is genetic. And I think in a way that should give us, confidence in that we are able to make an impact and we're not just, we're not going to have a heart attack or a stroke or any type of cardiovascular disease or even cancer for that matter, just because we may have certain markers we're born with as a result of family history. We can't change what our parents gave us. Just fingers crossed that our parents gave us good genes. But at the same time, we need to understand that we have the ability to impact our health when it comes to heart disease in a major way. And epigenetics is essentially our acquired risk. Right? Like, what are we doing? What are we acquiring by being who we are and what we're doing? And I do want to mention that someone like me, who I just talked about my family history, could have those markers that could put me at elevated risk for heart disease. So the second DNA biomarker, going back to your question, that we measure, they are genetic markers. So we do measure genetic markers and layer them with the epigenetic markers because there is, for us to more holistically understand, we cannot dismiss that some of us could be born with those variants. So we have to be cognizant that if our goal at the end of the day, which it is to remove blind spots, to provide as complete of information as possible to healthcare providers, we have to account for both of those information. What are we born with that we can't change? But what are we acquiring that we can make a positive impact?
Yeah, that's amazing. And how sensitive is the test? Because, how far back can you detect whether someone's going to have an incident? Because obviously the sooner you can understand there's an issue and deal with it, the better the outcome is going to be. So kind of How sensitive do you think that test can be in looking at whether someone has a propensity for one of these heart events?
Yeah. So the good news is myself, my co-founder, and our team come from a long academic background. So we've published studies after studies, not just in epigenetics and machine learning, but specifically to the Epi Plus Gen CHD test. So just to remind, it's a 3-year risk assessment for coronary heart disease specifically. So we're looking at the likelihood someone may have a coronary heart disease event, mainly a heart attack, in the next 3 years. We did a study in collaboration with Intermount Healthcare, peer-reviewed, published, essentially looking at the sensitivity of the test compared to the current gold standard. So just to give the listeners an idea of what the current gold standard, which they probably have gone through, is lipid-based testing. You take your cholesterol, you take your diabetes, clinicians ask you whether you smoke. They have different dots about you, but what they don't have is a good way, or a highly sensitive way to connect those dots. So we're extrapolating at this point when we're trying to understand someone's risk for heart disease, in this case, coronary heart disease. Essentially, with our test, with measuring genetic and epigenetic markers, we're measuring objective markers. We don't ask you questions. We don't need to know objective information because I'm eating all my fruits and vegetables. I'm exercising. I mean, I'm doing everything by the book, right? So we don't need the subjectivity because that influences, that adds noise to when we're trying to understand who our patients are. But in our case, we're looking at objective markers, the genetic and epigenetic markers. And when we're aggregating that, we're getting a highly sensitive, personalized view about the patient. And the sensitivity of the test is 78% for women and 76% for men. What that means is for every 100 women who are likely to have an event like a heart attack, we're identifying 78 out of 100 of them correctly. And for men, because it's 76%, 76 out of 100. Now, if we're contrasting that to what we have currently today, the test today that uses lipid-based markers is about 32% sensitive for women and 44% sensitive for men. So for every 100 women who are likely to have a heart attack, we're only understanding about 32 of them on average correctly and 44 out of 100 for men. So with our test, what we're able to do is improve the sensitivity by 1.7 times for men and 2.4 times for women. And that is huge because if we think about heart disease, one of the things that we've learned is the signs and symptoms between men and women are not the same. And there needs to be a test that does well in making sure that we're not going back to our old ways or traditional ways of just understanding heart disease well in men and trying to extrapolate that to women. So in our case, the test works pretty equally sensitive for men and women.
That's important. Right. And Sarah and I, and I'm not going to speak for you, Sarah, here, but Sarah, we really do a focus on female health, and primarily because Sarah is a leader there when it comes to red light and red light therapy. And a lot of our guests have talked about circadian rhythms and female health. So it is super important, and funding and all of those things that we never really hear about unless it's October and it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month, which has really been amazing. But I think heart health for women is just as important. And I have read that it is the number one killer for both men and women, but for women as well. And I know for us to be able to tell our listeners that is super important for this test. And I know that many of us have lost people in our lives to having unhealthy hearts. And so it is really important that we share that with our audience too. So thank you, Meesha, for mentioning that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super cool. What I'd like to know, Meesha, is what happens then once you get your kind of propensity score? I mean, is it like, do you have like a percentage or do you get some kind of score? And if you kind of are in that bracket where, it's a pretty high chance that you may have an event in the next 3 years, what then is the next step?
I think the way to think about it is we're the first line of defense. So you're getting really good information at the get-go that allows everything else downstream to be based better on good information, right? We've heard of the term garbage in, garbage out, and that's not what we're trying to achieve in healthcare in general. So with our test, what we provide is 3 layers of information. The first is we give the clinicians, again, the report goes back to the clinician, and the clinician is able to talk to their patients about their risk. The first information we do provide is what category of risk the patient falls under. So if we're looking at clinical guidelines today, someone could be at either low, borderline, intermediate, or high. And clinicians are used to that approach of looking at risk information. So that's the first way we do present the information. Now, how the categories are made up is essentially the percent risk. So if you're 0 to 5%, you're at low, 5 to 7.5, borderline, so on and so forth. So in addition to providing the category of risk, we do provide the exact percentage that we calculated for the patient. Now, when clinicians get that information, it's of course good information, but they need to understand, how does this patient look or compare to some other patient of mine who's of similar age and sex? Because we know that age is one of the largest risk factors for heart disease. As we grow old, whether we like it or not, our risk for heart disease increases. So what's the baseline sort of population level risk for someone who is a similar age and same sex compared to this patient that I have results for? And so that's the third layer of information that we provide as a comparison relative information for the clinicians to be able to make better clinical decisions. Now, as I pointed out, we're the first line of defense, right? We're primary prevention, we're at the start. But care for that patient doesn't end with our tests. It's essentially the information that's used to take the next step. And to your point, what happens if someone's at elevated risk? When someone's at elevated risk, the next step is for the clinician to send the patient to get a secondary test. It could be a coronary calcium, it could be a stress test, and they're looking at all information about their patients, family history, anything else, together with our test results, to be able to send the patient to a secondary test so they can get confirmation about that patient's risk. And then they put a prevention plan in place with interventions, whether it's therapeutics or whether it's lifestyle changes, that together helps the patient reduce their risk. Now, one of the nice things about epigenetics is we've shown that our epigenetic markers change in as little as 90 days. In this case, it was a peer-reviewed study on smoking cessation. So because we're able to remeasure a patient's risk over time once they have gone through intervention, it gives us the ability to monitor this patient over time, so we're not just giving them results and saying, bye, we'll see you later, right? That's care doesn't end with our test. It continues, it's cyclical. And the reason it's cyclical is because to be able to prevent heart disease, monitoring has to keep happening.
I see. Yeah. And the results go to a clinician. So is this something at the moment that's only available in the States?
Yes, it is currently only available in the States. We're working to get it. Heart disease affects more than just Americans, so we are working to get it to around the world. But we're establishing our base here in the U.S., and we do have some interesting initiatives in the pipeline to hopefully get it to more people than just the United States market.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
One thing Sarah and I have focused on is we try to do whole body, and we've focused on things like sleep, eating, and exercise, and also some of the outliers, things that we as biohacking community try to focus in on around things like red light, cold, foraging, mushrooms, things that just are sort of outliers that aren't as known. Are there things in there, like, is there a list of top 3 things that when we do find out or we don't know, that we can really step up and focus on for heart health? I know we've spent a lot of time on brain health, but heart health is just one that we, happy, a good brain health is great, but it doesn't mean that our heart is healthy. What are
Well, there's
maybe
a
the
huge
top three things?
connection too. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a huge
yeah.
axis between the brain and the heart. And yeah.
Funny, we were just talking. We were at a conference last week, and we were talking about systems biology with our heart, our gut, our brain, everything being connected. Here is one thing I would say. A lot of us, you know, we want to stay healthy. We take steps to stay healthy, whether it's going out on a hike or biking or eating healthy. One of the things that this test does, and another way to think about it is what we're doing enough? Is it working? Is there something else that we're missing? We treat people, if we go to our doctor's office, we're treating people for similar risk factors like cholesterol and diabetes. And we know many people who have heart attacks don't have any of those risk factors. First indication of coronary heart disease is a heart attack one fine morning. So there's a disconnect, in my opinion, between what we're doing and how does that translate to objective information about our risk. And that's the line we're essentially drawing, is connecting those dots. So to your listeners, we're doing a lot of different things, staying healthy, sleeping well, which we just saw. That's, more and more studies coming out showing that's
Oh, yeah.
very
We talk a lot
important.
about sleep. Yeah.
But it's never one dimension, right?
No.
It's not just about eating well. It's not just about sleeping well. It's not just about exercising. But is that what's working for me? Is there something else I should be doing? The data has to support what you're doing. And if you're constantly doing something, one example, one of the providers one of the earliest people who was very excited about our test said that he took a standard coronary calcium screen. He was cleared. He's an avid tennis player. He's not overweight. He really doesn't have any risk factors. Woke up one morning with a heart attack, and he's a clinician. And he was very excited because he said, I feel like I'm doing everything right? But why didn't that translate to being able to prevent a heart attack? And those are the kinds of people that we hear from, and those are the kinds of blind spots that we're looking to remove. Because it's one thing to be fearful, someone like me with a family history, oh my God, and I'm going to have a heart attack. But there's another thing to say, I can use objective data alongside with the provider to take those steps in a way where I can understand what's working and what's not.
Yeah. It's interesting because with a lot of things that you're doing, you can actually see the results, or you can feel the results. Here, it's not necessarily the truth. Are there things about how you feel? Are there indicators about how you feel? I know people tend to love to go to WebMD and be like, "Am I dying? Oh my God, I'm WebMD. Like, what am I dying of today?" Not saying I'm that person every day, but
Not
there are
at all,
days.
no.
No, not at all. But are there things about how you feel that should also be indicators around it? Because like you said, I'm exercising, I'm eating right, I'm sleeping right, but yet I'm still there. Is there something around how you feel that should be something not to ignore?
Yeah, guilty as charged. Bruised elbow, I probably have cancer, right? That's kind of the WebMD experience. But no, absolutely. I mean, there's no one who understands how we feel, and no one else is more in tune physically than ourselves. And one of the things I think worth pointing out here is men and women, for instance, experience heart attacks differently. Women tend to have more radiating pain down their arm, jaw pain. And I hate to say it, but I've spoken to enough people who have told me that their signs tend to be dismissed as something like anxiety, right? So if you're not feeling great, if you have chest pain, if you have, something that's just nagging at you, that's when you think about prevention, right? That's the opportunity. That's the window to get in front of it. It may not be anything, but I think that's a worthwhile effort to figure out if that is truly the case. Some people who are at risk for heart attacks have chest pain. Some, as we talked about, that's the first indication. They wake up one morning and they're having a heart attack. It's a spectrum, right? We're not able to say this, that, and therefore you're at risk. And that's why this or any other tests come into play. And they're also why, if you're not feeling the best, or if you're like, okay, I'm hitting a certain age, I should, get all my ducks in a row with respect to my health. I want to understand where I stand. It's an opportunity to do that, especially if you're not feeling great or if you think something's off. One opinion, second opinion, whatever it takes to get that mental clarity.
I see. That is something I was going to ask, actually. Like, who do you think are like your main audience for taking the test? And you clarified some people there, people who are maybe getting to a certain age, if you're experiencing some symptoms. Do you also think that, like people like the biohackers, people who are trying to optimize their health and just rule anything out, is that kind of an audience you anticipate? Or do you think it's more people who either have some kind of relative who has heart disease, or how are you kind of targeting it, and who do you think should be taking the test?
The right answer is all of the above. And our test is specifically meant for those who are at least 35 years old, who do not have signs or symptoms. We do have another product in our pipeline geared towards people who already have signs and symptoms. But this test is meant for people who don't have signs or symptoms and are at least 35 years old. And it's for anyone looking to optimize their health. So the biohacking community is, that is the perfect audience, because again, they're doing so many things. How does that translate to risk is the question mark. And this test fills in that question mark. It's also meant for people who have family history, but have not developed signs or symptoms, want to get ahead of the problem. The one example I'll give is this. So my grandfather passed from coronary heart disease. He had recurring heart attacks. Someone like him could have had better quality of life. Would he have prevented or had the opportunity to prevent? Because about 80% of heart attacks or cardiac events can be prevented. But looking at his kids, 2 out of 7 of them were affected by heart disease. Not all 7, 2 out of 7. So it's not guaranteed that just because you have a family history, you're going to be affected. But is that something you want to guess, or is that something you want to know? So those with family history, those who are looking to optimize their health and continue to stay healthy, those are the main groups of individuals we've seen very excited about our test.
Yeah, that's a great stat. 80% of heart attacks can be prevented. That's quite sobering, isn't it? I mean, really, it's just about making the right choices, getting the right information, and
That's exactly it. Incredible. Those two have to come together: information and choices.
Yes.
So part of this is holding a guilt trip over your parents, I believe. Thank you so much.
Is that what you got from that, Russ?
Yes, that's one. The other
is that what you just took from that?
Now, well, the other is I have kids too, and I'm going to send an apology letter and make sure they get tested. If I did pass anything down, what I don't want to miss here is where people can find the test, because we are letting everyone know every podcast you listen to, you'll hear that information. We have everything up on the rebelscientist.com site where you can get it. There, we do also thank you so much for giving our listeners $100 off. So if you use code Holiday 2022 2022, you get $100 off. And also, I imagine as well, asking your doctor is probably another way that you can do this too, correct? Or is this the only way you can do it? Do you have to ask your doctor for the test?
Well, you can go through either the link that you provided, or if they go to our website, cardiodiagnosticsinc.com, there's a product section. And when they go there and click the link, they will be taken to our telemedicine partner. So if someone's like, I don't have time, I'm too busy, I don't have a dedicated primary care provider, whatever the reason may be, if you click the link and go to our telemedicine partner's website, which is Elicity, you can go through the entire remote process. They have board certified clinicians there who would review your health history questionnaire, order it for you, go through the results for you, the entire process just using the remote version of our offering. But as I pointed out, if someone's interested in taking it and they want to see their clinician, that's an option as well.
Yeah.
It is. It probably is important for someone to actually help you with the results, especially me. Those that some of our listeners are very skilled at the quantified self, so they might understand those markers. I myself will not. I probably will call Sarah and be like, Sarah, please help me here, or my clinician. But yeah, it's super important. So thank you for that. Sorry,
thank you. Well, I was just going to say thank you, Meesha, for kind of bringing this product out. We're totally about kind of self-empowerment and getting the right information. So I think it's very cool what you've done, and it's really quite an achievement to kind of have done it to the level that you've done it to. So well done for that. And I look forward to when you can kind of get it out into other areas, other geographical areas. Where are you headed next? Are you kind of looking at other illnesses or other areas? What's next for you?
Yeah, so two things we think about. One is getting the current product to as many people as possible, so therefore expansions. But second thing is heart disease doesn't stop with coronary heart disease, right? Yes, it's the most common type of heart disease. Yes, it accounts for 42% of cardiovascular disease in general. But there are those of us who are affected by stroke or heart failure. And so those are the other areas where we're developing products in, and we're looking forward to make an impact in the entire field of cardiovascular disease. We just happen to start with coronary heart disease, but rest assured we're moving into the rest, and we'd be able to get people to prevent all the major types of cardiovascular disease out there.
Yeah, amazing. And I'm sure you'll do it too. Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming on and telling us about that. Like I say, we're going to put all the information up on the website. We've got it all going out on the podcast. Maybe we'll get Russ to try it out. He's a good guinea pig for these things, and we can look, and then we can maybe go through and see what the results were, and then see, what the process is actually like. But thanks again for coming on. It's really great to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's always amazing. I tell people I can talk about cardio and what we do for days. So I'm glad we got to condense it down. But I'm always open for a conversation.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Meesha.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Goodbye. Bye.
Yep. Bye.
Breaking the gray.